Let's talk about my method for doing Alla Prima block-ins. So here I'm painting one of my painting heroes, Burton Silverman. Definitely check out his artwork if you can. He is a New York City legend when it comes to figurative representational art. And I've been lucky enough to be able to hang out with him in his studio a couple times and interview him and really learn his thought process behind his work. Burt Silverman's been a huge inspiration to me as an artist over the years. And so I'm going to rewind this video and go right to the very beginning. I thought it'd be fun to try and capture a 2-hour Alla Prima block-in only 30 minutes. So I have my white canvas here, just white gesso. I'm going to coat the canvas with a mixture of ultramarine blue and raw umber. Once I get it all in, I take a paper towel and I rub it into the surface of the painting. Now I start in by blocking in where the head is going to fit within the canvas. So I block in using just raw umber at this stage, and I'm using a Royal Langnickel long bright. So there's a lot of give to the brush. And I start in by figuring out where the top of the head is, where the chin is, and where my anchor point of the eyes are going to be. And just block in the orbital cavities for the eyes. Find out where the nose is, and I start to measure out from my eyes. Figuring in where the hand is going to be. Then I block in where the background is. Now, getting in the background and the shirt just roughed in value-wise, which gives me great context for when I go into the portrait with full color. So here I'm starting in with my midtones now. I have my darks established by doing the block in. So coming in with the halftones and just large areas of color, different hues. A little bit of blue into that mix, softening out that edge. Now I'm not worried about my drawing so much at this point, where I can go over areas that I thought were where the wrinkles were, or in the forehead, or even exactly where the orbital cavities are, or where the nose is. I can go in and I'm adjusting things as I go to be more accurate. When I first do my block-ins, they aren't super accurate. You know, there's a push and pull between areas that get wider versus thinner, or areas that the shadow is a little bit longer. Coming in, putting some chroma in the beginning with some of that brilliant pink from Michael Harding. Now the reference for this piece is available on my Patreon page, as well as the real-time footage, which is, I believe, about an hour and a half. I did time-lapse the drawing process a little bit. Coming into the hand, thinking about the length of that top finger. Blocking again, going into those halftones, leaving the lights for the very end. Getting in the chromatic light coming through the ears. Because of cartilage, the ears tend to be a lot redder because light passes through those areas that are vascular within the ear, which means there's blood vessels. Really starting to develop from the center point out. And the brush I'm using here is just it's a really affordable, long, bright, synthetic from, I think I bought this from Walmart. It came in like a group pack of a lot of brushes. I tend to use a few name brand brushes from Rosemary & Co., which is I love their ivory rounds. But for the most part, I use cheapy brushes. Coming around to the side, redefining the drawing on the shadow side here. Constantly redrawing. Don't be afraid to move outside of your initial drawing to develop the painting. We want to have a sense of movement to our painting. And so we want that sense of change. We want an organic movement to what's going on within our piece, so it's constantly changing. We don't want to just stick with our block in that we initially laid in and just fill that in. We want to move around the piece, and so that we are really developing our emotional responses to what it is within the painting that we want to fix, areas that we want to hold on to. And it's almost an irrational kind of method where I'm just interested in different areas at different times. Where I see that red in the ear, I'm like, I'm not just going to sit here and render the entire ear, but I love that bit of chromatic red. So I'm going to go and grab that. Or in this case, I love the blue, that gray that's going on with the hairline and how that area fades into the forehead, or the swoop of the hair over the ear. So there's these irrational things that I go after when I do a painting that I call them emotional responses, because they're not necessarily logical. And so I constantly am jumping around the painting, following these emotional responses, rather than sitting in one area and rendering it out completely. And I think it's kind of maybe an ADHD approach to the painting, but it works because then you're kind of thinking about all of this together as one, as opposed to just features. And everything will be a little rough and not drawn perfectly. But then as I go around, I start to lift areas that aren't drawn as well into being better drawn. And then I'm lifting up this part of the painting and lifting up this part of the painting all together, all at once, rather than rendering one area that's not connected to another. Getting in some of the shadow in the hand. It's really interesting to see my painting process from this perspective, where I'm like, wow, I think the hand might be a little too big. And this is actually going to help me. The next stage of this painting, after this Alla Prima block in, I think I'm going to dive deeper into the painting to make it more alive, and I'm going to film the entire process of making this into a very representational, very realistic portrait of one of my favorite artists, Burton Silverman. And so I'll probably film that next week. So coming in here, knocking in the cools of his hand, redrawing the edges of the hand right here. I love the muscular structure and the bone structure of hands, how they tuck in on each other and the form. It's something that I'm really excited to get into. So for me, doing this 2-hour block in is kind of like a tease. I am lucky where I can take now this painting and take it further. Working from a photo kind of gives me that advantage where I don't have the model in the studio that will never pose again like I used to at the Art Students League when I studied. But having the photo to work from, I can go back to this painting at any time and readdress areas that I think by looking at this perspective of watching the video, I can make better. Coming in, I'm going to just knock in some of the background as well. And as I'm doing that, I'm kind of redrawing the width of the head. Coming around to the side. Again, having those darks really help us with context of understanding the values much better in the actual form where the color is within the portrait. Judging out, I can see that area is too light now, where his beard is hitting the background. We want to think about the atmosphere around the subject as well. Now within Alla Prima, I'm not necessarily so concerned with the atmosphere around the subject as much as I will be when I start to dive deeper into the portrait. But at this stage, it is block in, thinking about color. It's organizing my values, my lights and my darks, and kind of just knocking things in and trying to make them in the right place. Getting some of that dark in there. I could see where I could get more subtly blue/green into some of the beard. That doesn't bother me yet. Again, this is what I call like the setup for the next stage for my paintings. This is the ugly stage. This is not, I think it's getting well drawn, but I think it can be better. The edge control can be better. The luminosity can be better. And what I love is kind of combining this idea of alla prima with a more direct approach to later on in layers. Well, I guess I still think of it as I use a direct approach as opposed to an indirect approach, which is more through glazes. I don't do a lot of glazes. I do a lot of opaque, what I put down is what I see layers of painting, as opposed to thinking about this is going to be glazed over this area. And so having the alla prima opaque block in to work from gives me a structure that's already there. The drawing is close, and I'm just going to go through and start from the center point out of the eyes and start to reshape and get the subtlety of the subforms on top of this large mass. And so for me, this alla prima is get everything in the right place, get a nice block in of a base color that's simplified, that I can start to develop into a more sophisticated rendering, I guess, of the subject. More thoughtful, a little slower. It's I start fast but finish slowly, because as I start to see things, I start to notice where I'm really off. Like I can see that the brow on the side by the ear is a little too far out and too dark. So I would think about how that subform of the brow ridge would turn in the next stage, which I'm pretty excited about. I have some commissions going on in the studio right now, so I have to work on those, they're also fun. But starting this last week was a little treat to spend my day just doing this quick little block in. I definitely recommend, if you have a studio at home, to have if you have the room. Thankfully I do, that I can have one area that I can have an alla prima set up where I can just practice or do color studies that you guys have seen on the channel. And then I have my main easel that I work on my larger commissions and pieces that are for galleries. It's kind of cool to have more than one station. I'm also thinking about putting in a pastel station where I can work on pastels and drawings with, and it's not even easels. I'm using magnetic boards. So I have a magnetic sheet on one wall that I use to draw into and paint into. This is on a magnetic board, which is great for filming if you guys ever want to film, because there's no bouncing in the actual painting. You can see, because I'm literally working on a wall. And my palette is also have magnets on the back, so that sticks to the wall as well. So coming in here, and you guys would all know that the Patreon folks, because they get the behind the scenes of the studio and everything, have know most of this stuff, so I apologize if I'm repeating for those guys. Coming in here with a smaller brush just to shape out the drawing a little bit more. And I work on the eyes together, left and right, again, so that all the features are connected in a way. What I do love about the alla prima is that there's this roughness to it. Even the brush strokes have a little bit of roughness to them, which is kind of fun to play into when I go to the next stage. Because sometimes I want to keep those. I don't want a pristine, smooth surface within my paintings. I want my lights to be chunky and have kind of dissonant elements of texture that aren't expected. So to have something that looks representational, but then also some areas are unexpected, is really important for me. We don't want it to just be a monotone surface at all. Coming into that nose. Now, the one problem I do have is that when you are a representational painter and you present your work online, a lot of the work looks can look flat and shiny because they're on screens, unfortunately. So I recommend that anyone out there go see shows in real life, go to museums in real life, because paintings in real life just look so much better than they do online. And so, like, what is alla prima, right? So alla prima it's an Italian word, and it means first attempt, at first attempt. And it's a direct painting approach where most of the work is done wet into wet. And so all the layers are still movable, still open, as they say. And so another term for it, you could just call it wet on wet painting, as well as alla prima. And it's different than different approaches like underpainting and glazing and scumbling. This is all done pretty much, and I call this my alla prima block-in because it's all done in one session, but for me, it's just a block-in. And I was thinking at one point, do I kind of keep this as what it is? And for me, it's satisfying to block in something, but I don't feel like I'm an alla prima painter. It's not my strong suit. And so I love the idea of being able to use this as an energetic, expressive jumping off point, diving board for me to dive into really sculpting this painting and getting into the things that my temperament as an artist loves, really developing form and color and really trying to capture more about not the feeling of the fluidity of paint within a painting, but the feeling of the subject in itself, as opposed to, that's where I think emotion within my painting is. It's not in the fluidity of the stroke or the color of the painting. It's in the subject matter itself, exuding their emotion. And so that's what I'm going to dive into, is how do I capture the expressiveness of the subject within the piece. But I love those who do alla prima and can do that. Just for me, it's I'm going to learn that, actually. These YouTube videos have been great for me because I've been able to study the things I've been wanting to study for a long time. And doing the YouTube really gives me an excuse to do that, especially the Patreon folks too. It's been really incredible. I want to thank everybody over on Patreon for supporting the channel. I really appreciate it. You guys really make these deep dives that take hours and hours to produce possible. And YouTube also. So it's interesting. So I'm trying to think of like, where did alla prima start? And I think if we go back to the Renaissance, back then Titian and I think Rubens were some of the guys that really experimented with direct fluid brushwork. Also Van Dyck. Van Dyck's incredible. He's one of my favorite painters also. And then I think from them, it kind of the timeline jumped to like Diego Velázquez, who would do these alla prima passages within his paintings where he was abstracting things into one stroke. But I think it really kind of hit also in the Baroque, but the Dutch Golden Age with Frans Hals. Really, I mean, if you see a Frans Hals painting, everything is at one beautiful alla prima stroke. And it was rapid, and it captured these, these guys at the bar drinking their beer and everything. It was really, I think probably Frans Hals was one of the first to master the alla prima technique. And then you have like artists that brought it outside, did more plein air, like Monet, Manet, Renoir, all those guys. And then it kind of, from there in the timeline, I would say it probably moved towards Anders Zorn, Sorolla, and of course, John Singer Sargent, who we hold up. John Singer Sargent is incredible. Actually, I think for the channel, I want to study John Singer Sargent portraits. I think that would be valuable as well. So I think that's something that I'm going to do. Maybe we do some alla prima block-in copies of Sargent and Zorn. If you guys have any suggestions, definitely leave them in the comments. I'd love to hear. So like what the characteristics of the technique really are. These like paint is just applied confidently, bold. I tend to put things in bold in the beginning, and then I start to hone in on the smaller areas, the edges of the large masses and how they fit together. So I think of everything as a two-dimensional puzzle piece first, and then I start to chisel away at those large puzzle pieces until they fit. There's a very fine machined edge to a flat piece of what the orbital cavity, which would be flat, versus the forehead, right? How those two pieces connect within the block-in is really refined. So it's not like when I go in with a small brush, I'm looking for the detail. I'm looking for the subtle shifts within the shapes, the large mass shapes, and how they fit together well. And then from that stage, I move into understanding the form and using cross contours to develop where the forehead and the brow ridge into the orbital cavity would flow, thinking about that aspect. And so that would be my next step within this, would be to maybe redraw some of the areas so that they're finer subtlety between them and more representative of the subject to capture his subtlety better. A little bit of small work in proportions, and then start to really develop what the form is going to be. And that's going to be the next video, working on on Burton here, the next video. So it's interesting, the coming in here, really starting to shape out some of the cheek and the nose, the wing of the nostril here. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. You can see I'm starting to develop where those puzzle pieces connect. So I'm going to come in with a larger brush to work some of that wet into wet, to start to think a little bit about the form and softening up those edges. And again, I'm not really using, at this stage, since I have everything scrubbed in, I'm starting to use brushes that are a little bit softer. Again, getting into that upper brow. It's funny to see some of the brushes I use. This is a cheap, I think it's a Royal Langnickel brush, but I believe it was from Walmart, which is super affordable. You can buy a brush pack for I think $4 or $5, and it has like 3 or 4 different brushes. And these are just synthetic brushes that are really great for softening out areas and applying paint. I think the only thing you have to worry about is if the ferrule, which is the metal part that holds the bristles, if that comes off from the handle. That happens every now and then. You just put a drop of super glue in and hold it there, and it should be fine for the next session. Sculpting out the ear, softening up with thinking a little bit of the rhythm of how the beard kind of flows into the hand. Let's get into the hand a little bit. It's got this really beautiful violet undertones. And then kind of shaping out a little bit of what's going on with the knuckles. Get that dark in between there. With the pinky is really beautiful because it kind of hides into the shadows. And this whole side here, the underplane of the hand is a lot darker. I can see that now. Much easier to look at yourself paint rather than do this in real time. Again, what I do love about all of this painting, though, is that this is a record of all my mistakes and my successes, all on the panel. It's capturing all of these thoughts, where I feel like, looking at the hand, I feel like the hand could be a little bit smaller. Like the width of the thumb, I think, could be a little bit smaller. I tried to put the reference to be the same size-ish as my painting. Again, I'm not a machine as a painter, but I'm using it as inspiration for what it is I'm working on. And so it comes up and over, soften out that knuckle. Getting a little bit of the highlights now. Thinking of the length of that finger and how that comes over. Now the next stage is I would think about what's going on with the fingernails even. I love the blue undertones here, so I'm just kind of knocking in where the veins will be. Undertone, and that's a king's blue. Working wet into wet again so it can kind of fade into what we have going already. Softening out these edges. Again with that really cheapy brush. Coming into the cadmium red, just to push up some of the chroma now that I'm seeing in areas. Softening up part of the nose. My brushwork follows a sense of the form a little bit as I start to get to this stage. So pulling in some of the radiant green. And again, those are sort of undertones to what's going to go on top of it. When I mean an undertone, so I just lay that in, I can lay another color on top of that. I know that that'll sit and dry, and then the next day, when I start to push this further into more of a realism realm, I can use those greens to really pull warms on top of, so that there's a vibration in color. That's a really interesting thing about working in direct layers, is that you can, not necessarily you can glaze, but you can kind of do spot strokes where other colors can come through, almost like broken scumbles or hatches, where other colors can come through under layers. And so I constantly am thinking about that when I do a painting. If I want something to be, if I notice it's a little warm, I will do the opposite undertone. I'll put a cool undertone down, and vice versa. Now with the hair, I do feel that there's some green in there, as well as some blues. And so putting in these under layers of color at this stage is kind of setting it up for the next day, setting up the painting for the next day. I always say that in my classes when we do 3 hours in the morning or 3 hours in the afternoon. I have them finish up, soften all their edges, think about the painting for the next day. Come in here, lightening that shadow up a little bit. Our shadows start so dark in the very, very beginning because they're just shapes. They're not fitted into a value structure yet. So as we start to work, we start to develop that value structure. We notice if one shadow is too dark. And so we lighten that up. That would be, everything is really based on these simple questions that we ask ourselves. Is something too light or too dark? And then we go in and we fix that. Or we try to get as close as we can. Awesome. Coming in here and just kind of shaping out a little bit smaller areas. Again, using a soft brush that's a little bit smaller. Thinking about that cheek. Thanks so much for watching. If you got something out of this video, hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps this channel to keep growing. I also want to give a huge thank you to everyone who's been supporting the channel over on Patreon and here on YouTube. Your comments, shares, and encouragement really keep this community going and growing. If you want to dive deeper with full-length lessons and behind-the-scenes stuff from my studio, check out the Patreon community with the link in the description. It's been amazing to connect with so many artists over there. And if you're interested in learning to draw and paint with me in person, I have an ongoing list of upcoming in-person workshops. Just scan the QR code you see on the screen for all the details. I'm now streaming a live drawing session every Wednesday morning where we'll study history, composition, and techniques behind some of my favorite works from art history. It all starts at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico, right here on YouTube. So grab some coffee, bring your sketchbook, and come hang out with me. It's a fun, low-pressure way to draw together and dive deep into some really great art in real time. Thanks again for being part of this journey with me. Paint well, and I'll see you in the next video. Or even better, I'll see you guys live on Wednesday morning. Take care.